Our next system is digestive, chapter 17. I'm going to skip this video because I want to make sure we can do the PowerPoints before lunchtime. But you can feel free to look it up. And there are some useful references in it. The digestive system's functions, tying it into those characteristics of life from back in chapter 1, are digestion, absorption, and excretion. The excretion is mostly through defecation or feces, although some of what's in the feces is not just left over from the food, but is actually excreted by the liver into the intestines. There are two parts to digestion, mechanical and chemical. Mechanical digestion just breaks the food into smaller pieces, like chewing. Chemical digestion actually breaks up the molecules in the food into smaller pieces. So, breaking protein into amino acids, polysaccharides into sugars, and so on. The organs of the digestive system are classified into two groups. The alimentary canal, which is where the food travels. You'll also see it called the digestive tract or GI tract. GI stands for gastrointestinal. What's gastro? Stomach. Okay. So starting at the mouth, it includes your pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small and large intestine. Then the other group is the accessory organs. These are attached to the alimentary canal and secrete things that are involved in digestion, like enzymes and bile, but the food doesn't actually travel through them. This is the liver, pancreas, and salivary glands. So let's see how many structures you already recognize. This little pink thing, tongue, space above it, the oral cavity or mouth, the fancy word for the throat, pharynx. The trachea is going to be your airways, which we'll talk about in the next chapter. Any idea what these little blobby guys are?
Lymph nodes.
Yep, they're much bigger than lymph nodes.
What's the name?
Salivary glands. Yeah, there's one in your cheek and two kind of up under your jaw on each side. This tube, esophagus, stomach, the big one, liver, the little green gallbladder. Spleen's going to be over here on the other side of the stomach. The yellow blobby thing, pancreas. These two, small intestine, and this one, large intestine. So small and large are based on the diameter of the tube, not the length. The small intestine is actually much longer. Throughout the alimentary canal, there are consistent layers to the walls. Starting from the lumen, the opening of a tube, working out from there is the mucosa, submucosa, muscularis, and serosa. They're shown here. This innermost slice has both mucosa and submucosa on it. These rich ones are the muscularis, and then the thin outer one is the serosa. The mucosa has three parts to it. The epithelium, which is the lining. I'm just going to draw part of it. So that'll be an epithelial tissue, which type varies by region. The most common is simple columnar, the single layer of tall cells. The epithelium is what's going to absorb nutrients and secrete things. And in some locations, it's wrinkled or folded to increase the surface area. Moving out from the epithelium is connective tissue called the lamina propria. Which means its own layer. That is where the small blood vessels are to provide nutrients to the epithelium and to pick up the nutrients that are coming in. And then the last part is the muscularis mucosae, which is a thin layer of smooth muscle. Next is the submucosa. It is more loose connective tissue. And it has the larger blood vessels in it to transport the oxygen in, to get to the smaller vessels in the lamina propria, and to transport the absorbed nutrients away. In some locations there are glands which actually extend down from the epithelium in the mucosa. So some secretion will come directly from the epithelium, some will come from these glands. Then we have the muscularis, which is 2 layers of smooth muscle, thicker than the muscularis mucosae. The inner one is circular, so it goes around the tube. And that's similar to the only layer that the blood vessels have, the tunica media, where it's wrapped around the tube, and when it contracts, it constricts the tube and can even pinch it off temporarily. The outer layer is longitudinal. It would look like dots mostly in a cross section because you would just see the thin thickness of the smooth muscle cells. Muscularis moves food around in the alimentary canal. Coming up, we'll talk about types of motility or movements that we'll see. Then the serosa is the outer layer. It's also the thinnest. In the same way that the epicardium, the outer layer of the heart, is also the visceral pericardium, the serosa is the peritoneum. As any serous membrane, it's simple squamous epithelium, single layer of flat cells, and a bit of connective tissue. Its job is to lubricate the organs so that they don't have any friction when they slide against each other, such as your intestines churn. There are some parts of the digestive tract that don't have a serosa, like the esophagus, because it's in the thoracic cavity, but behind the pleura and pericardium, and it just has connective tissue holding it in place. But most of the small and large intestine has some serosa. So here's a more detailed view, starting with the picture we saw before, looking closer in. So everything from here out is mucosa, with the lightest line, that's the coating, as epithelium. All of this is lamina propria. Here's the muscularis mucosae. Then this one's submucosa. 2 layers here of muscularis. These yellow parts are nerve networks that control the motility of the muscularis and the secretion in the submucosa. And here you can see a gland. And then just this thin strip at the bottom is the serosa. Here's a close-up of just part of mucosa, so you can see the epithelium and the lamina propria. Because it's sticking up like this, it doesn't have muscularis mucosae. Although in some cases there is a little bit that sticks up into there and can help move those bumps.
So the serosa, is it only in the organs that are like in a cavity, or is it also like?
Yeah, it's only on the ones that are in the abdominal cavity.
So what about like the bottom part of the digestive?
Like the rectum, the last bit of the large intestine actually doesn't have serosa. It's in the pelvic cavity, and it just has connective tissue.
Okay,
Oops. Too far. Movement in the alimentary canal has 2 major patterns. Segmentation, where it's called this because the circular layer contracts in multiple places with gaps in between. So dividing the tube into segments. And what that does is pushes the contents back and forth to mix them, both to mix the food with enzymes and to push different parts of the mixture against the walls where it can get absorbed. And then peristalsis pushes the contents in one direction by squeezing right behind it, pushing it on and on. Peristalsis is most important in swallowing, when instead of keeping the food around for a while to work on it, you just want to get it somewhere. The top picture is segmentation. They've used yellow and blue to show mixing of the contents from 2 areas. And then this is peristalsis, so consecutive squeezing to push the food. Questions on the general stuff on the alimentary canal? The motility is controlled by the autonomic nervous system and occasionally by hormones. We'll talk about a couple of hormones at the end of the chapter. The parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system is sometimes called feed and breathe, sometimes called rest and digest. So in both cases, we see that it's the one that stimulates digestion. It's going to stimulate motility in the muscularis and also secretions. The other branch, sympathetic, that's our fight or flight, or 4 E's, emergency, exercise, excitement, embarrassment. For the most part, it's going to inhibit digestive activity, but there's one exception. Sphincters, like the precapillary sphincters, are rings of muscle that can close off a tube. And they're found at the borders of organs, so from esophagus to stomach, stomach to small intestine, small to large. And they're actually tightened by the sympathetic nervous system. So that helps make sure the food just stays where it is instead of moving on when you're not putting any of your energy into digesting it. This is why they tell you not to exercise right after a meal, because a gentle walk can be good, but strenuous exercise draws the energy away from digestion, and then you get indigestion from the food just sitting. Okay, so now we're going to start at one end of the alimentary canal, work our way down, looking at the accessory organs as we connect to them. Starting at the mouth, the oral cavity is the space inside. You can think of it kind of as a box. Where the lateral walls or the sides are the cheeks. The anterior wall is the lips. The cheeks and lips help to move the food, and they also hold it in. I'm not sure when they evolved in our line, but in the dinosaurs, the early plant eaters didn't have cheeks, and they swallowed rocks to help digest, break up their food mechanically, because the food would fall out if they tried to chew it too long. They evolved cheeks that held the food in so they could chew it longer, and then put less effort into digesting it further down the line. The inferior wall would be the tongue.